Welcome, everyone, to the Nerd Journey Podcast, episode number 52. We're joining you every week to talk IT career progression and bring you the advice we wish we'd been given earlier on in our careers. I'm your host, John White, at VJourneyman on Twitter, joined by my co-host, Nick Cordy, at NetworkNerd_. Hey, Nick, how's it going?
John, I am delightful. We are VMware solution engineers. Your face, like I saw your face out of the corner of my eye and I just lost it. You had that, didn't expect him to say that. Okay, hang on. Excuse me. 3, 2, 1. John, I am delightful. We are VMware solution engineers with backgrounds in IT operations. We hope our career discussions will be vendor neutral, relevant across disciplines, and remain timeless. If you're enjoying our content, please drop us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you subscribe. And if you want to get in touch with us, tweet or DM at Nerd Journey. Ultimately, we're just two nerds on a journey.
A journey to virtual enlightenment.
So let's take a trip.
Awesome, Nick. This week is part 2 of our conversation with Charlie Nichol about the transition to becoming a manager. And it's interesting because the typical part 1, part 2 that we've been following so far, that pattern that we've had, has been part 1 is completely about career journey, and then part 2 is about kind of the topic that we invited the person to talk about. But that hasn't been the case with the Charlie Nichol episode. We, in episode 51, kind of got almost directly into that transition from individual contributor to manager. And we're continuing with that discussion, things like one-on-one meetings and things like that. Like just his perspective on what newly minted managers need to do to become better at that. And people who want to become managers have to do to prepare themselves.
Right. And I really enjoyed his tips on how do I know if being a manager is right for me? What decision tree or set of questions can I ask myself to see if this is something I should even try? And he even gives us advice, if you haven't tried it, how do you know? I think Ethan Banks echoed that same thing, that even his brief experience in management was helpful, even though he didn't care for it.
Yeah, exactly. Just, again, a super insightful guy, obviously extremely thoughtful, extremely introspective, and also very good at really communicating the lessons that he had learned, to us in a discussion. Not everybody can be all of those things, right?
Yeah, I mean, that just goes to show you, John, that managers can say smart things.
Yeah.
Even though not everybody gives them the credit they deserve, right?
Man, I just assume that managing a group of really smart, opinionated people is got to be one of the most difficult jobs out there.
I'm sure it is. Without further ado, here we go. Charlie Nichol, part 2. Something else I want to ask, Charlie. You gave some great nuggets on your transition to becoming a manager. But if I'm someone out there who's an individual contributor at any company and I'm thinking about becoming a manager, what kind of advice would you give me? Is there a better way for me to advance? Or what if management's the only way to go at my company?
Yeah, so I think there's some short and long-term answers to that. When I make decisions now, this is not how I made decisions when I was an individual contributor, by the way. But now when I look at my career, I go, okay, what's important to me? And I stole a whole bunch of this from Ben Bergeron's Chasing Excellence podcasts, but I look at bigger picture, what's important to me, what do I want to do? What is it that I like about my job now, and where do I want to be when I retire? And what skills do I need to get there? So I've always wanted to run a small company. I like the ability to impact people's lives by doing that. And so if I know that I want to go do that job, I have some skills that I've crafted now that will be good at that. And then there's some other skills that I don't have. So how do I go get experience with those skills? So For example, I needed to learn more about the financial stuff, right, in order to run a company. And so over the last couple of years, I've really worked on understanding what a regional director, a sales director might have to do. Could I step in and run my forecast call for my RD if they're out? The first answer was no, I absolutely couldn't. So I want to know what steps I need to take in order to be able to do that. So I went and asked my RD, and I sat down with him and I understood, and I grabbed his reports and I started to manipulate them myself and learn that financial side that is probably not the most fun for me, but it's really necessary to me building that full skill set. So if you're thinking about becoming a manager, what skills do you think that you have now that are already a good fit? Maybe you're a top performer, maybe you like to work hard, maybe you're good with people, but maybe you don't have any idea how things connect to the business, right? Or maybe you've never taken any classes on leadership. What does that mean? How do I motivate someone who is a bottom performer or who's unhappy, especially if I don't have the ability to exit that person from the business? Like, I'm just going to be stuck with that person. What do I do about that? Read some leadership books, listen to some leadership podcasts, go to really, really good leaders and ask for a one-on-one and say, hey, how would you deal with this situation? I don't know how to have a difficult conversation about someone's performance or someone's attendance or, how to address something awkward. How can you go build that craft if you want to be a manager? Go talk to people who are doing it. Most managers I know, especially really good ones, are willing to have that meeting with you at some sort of regular cadence so that you can go close that gap in your skill set. How do you know if you want to be a manager? Does the stuff we talked about today sound exciting to you? Again, the same question is, when you want to be an SE, are you ready to step away from the keyboard? Are you ready to step a little further away from the keyboard as a manager? Because now your job is not to be excellent at the technology anymore. You need to understand how it works. You need to understand why it's important to the business and whether or not it's a viable solution. Of course, you want to be able to see through smoke and mirrors type stuff. Maybe see through the marketing a little bit and see if it's as real as it could be, right? Find some sources out there and trust, read what they say. But I think, are you ready to focus more on the people, right? That's what leadership is all about, is understanding people and helping them go achieve their goals. And if you're doing it right, you're going to be working for some of them at some point, right? You want to see them get promoted and move up and move on. And if that scares you or that threatens you, then it might not be a good fit. But I think the best way to find out is just to go do it. Go look at good leaders, ask them if they think you're a fit, just like my manager did with me. Now, he sort of initiated that career conversation about me being a leader, but it came from me saying, what's it take to get promoted to senior? Because eventually I want to work as a CTO. And he said, well, have you thought about leadership, right? So you need to go have that career conversation like you guys talked about in your earlier podcasts. Go have those, and not just with your manager. I mean, I think the easiest thing to do is go find someone who's got something you want, someone who, so for me, it's right now, I go talk to people who run small businesses and I ask them how they got there and what that was like, and I ask them to tell me the ugly parts of it too. This may not be something I want, right? I need to know that better now than later. And so I would encourage anyone that if manager is their next step, if it's just, that's the only place for me to get promoted, that's the only way for me to make more money or to move up at this company, is it necessarily a good fit for you? Maybe, maybe not. What I wouldn't do is rule it out. What's the worst that's going to happen? So either two things are going to happen. Either you're going to be good at it or you're not, right? And if you're good at it and you find that that's something you want to continue, then great. That's sort of the easy answer. What if you take a shot at it and you become a manager and you're like, this is terrible, I hate it? Well, I would look at, what don't you like about it? Is it the culture of the company? Is it that you don't have a good mentor to help you navigate some of these things? Is it you don't like challenge and you're comfortable just being good at tech? Or is it that you really just don't like dealing with people all that much, right? If that's the answer, then, it might not be a good fit for you. But I would say that, and in the worst case, if you have a growth mindset, meaning that you're willing to accept challenges and know that that's going to cultivate you into a better individual, then why not give it a shot and see what you can find out about yourself? Then you'll know for sure, okay, well, that's definitely not for me. Now I can with 100% confidence go pursue this individual contributor path, knowing that I tried, the other thing. But if you've got 5 or 6 other leaders that you respect telling you to go give that a shot, I would be surprised if it's not a good fit. It also doesn't have to be forever. Just because you manage people for a few years doesn't mean you're always going to be in that role. You can have the opportunities to sort of bounce back and forth. But I would argue that there are a lot of individual contributors who are leaders. Just because you don't have the manager title doesn't mean you're not a leader. I mean, and not even just a team lead, but someone who's setting an example, who's bringing the team up, who's being positive, who's bringing good, new, fresh ideas to the team, who's mentoring people. That is a leader, right? Someone that people follows, right? By definition. So, are people following what you're doing? Well, then you're already a leader. So, you might as well get the title, right? You might as well get, the promotion to go with it.
Maybe we could talk a little bit about, some of those soft responsibilities like that leaders have or managers of teams have. Um, how do you develop people on a team? And maybe what I mean by that is, when you go in and you're the manager, you can't just do people's jobs for them, right? If they have a gap, you can't just jump in and fill it. So how do you help people to develop as an individual contributor and fill in those gaps?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's something that I definitely didn't know how to do. And I think it's really easy. You see this a lot where a leader or a manager was promoted to that job because they were extraordinary at doing that individual contributor job. You were a really good SE, so now you're SE manager. Or you were a really good sales rep, and so now you're a regional sales manager or an inside sales manager or a regional director. And a trap that a lot of people fall into, myself included early on, was when you see someone struggling, you're like, well, I was really good at that, so I'm just going to go tell you how to do it. And that's the old, um, teach a man to fish story. You have to, if you want to develop people, they have to fail, right? And again, stealing nuggets from Ben Bergeron is that there's really no such thing as failures, right? Succeed or learn. And so if you don't give people that opportunity to learn, then they're not going to improve, right? And my manager always gave me the advice of letting someone have enough rope to hang themselves. And so you have to sometimes not step in when you see someone going down the wrong path and let them sort of make that mistake and then help coach them and learn from it. And I think VMware is really good about putting leaders through training. I've probably taken 30 or 40 classes since I've been at VMware and been involved in 6-month long, even multi-year leadership programs where I'm with other leaders, both in person and virtual. And one of them was called Genius Makers, and they focused a lot on coaching. And so it really helps you to understand how to not just give someone the answer, but to ask them questions so that they arrive at the answer on their own, right? And that takes a lot more time, and it's a lot harder, and it's really awkward at first because you're not going to be good at it. I don't think that anyone is, naturally, but if you continue to ask them the question, okay, so why might you do that? It's almost like the 5 whys, right? But you got to not sound like an obnoxious 5-year-old. So asking them why they might do something, what the implications might be, what they think the pros and cons are, and of course you got to ask the who, what, where, when, why, not closed-ended questions, right? Just like an interview or like when you're asking a customer questions about their environment. Let them elaborate and explain and let them arrive at that answer on their own without giving them the answer or, like you said, doing their job for them. Now, if it's a burning building scenario, you're not going to teach the firefighter how to, not save the baby, right? Sometimes you do have to step in and stop something if it's going sideways. But I got some coaching from one of my individual contributors early on. It's one of my first sales meetings in the field as a field SE manager. And this was like my second field SE to hire. We were up in Boston, and the customer was asking some questions about a technology that I had a lot of depth and experience in. And the SE didn't answer immediately, so I jumped up and just explained it all and went to the whiteboard and even brought in some slides and just sort of took over the meeting, and I thought I was showing him how it's done. Like, hey, here's how you do things. And this is, my second field SE, so we're a couple of years into my leadership role at this point, right? This isn't month 2. And, at the end of that meeting, he said, man, you stole my thunder. Like, you did all of my work for me. And I don't get to do my job. Like, what value am I to the customer? So now I didn't get a chance to build that rapport with them and show them that I can be helpful to them and that I know my stuff and that I've honed my craft. And I was like, oh wow, here I am thinking I'm saying smart manager things, as Nick would say. I think I'm being a good leader by providing a good example of what running a meeting looks like. And I just took my SE's legs out from underneath him. So not only have I damaged that relationship, I've sort of pointed the customer in the wrong direction. And I love that individual contributor was brave enough to give me that feedback, because that couldn't have been easy for him. But it was some of the best feedback I've ever gotten as a manager. Was don't steal his thunder. And so now I have a plan when I go in with SEs. I won't step in unless you want me to. What would you like me to contribute to this meeting? And every SE answers that question differently, probably in every meeting. They'll answer that differently.
Do you have a secret code word? Is that how you do it?
Yeah, Butterfinger. No, I don't have don't have a secret code word for that. But usually it's fairly obvious, especially if we talked about it in advance, which we do now. But coaching is so important, right? And I think it needs to be bidirectional. I ask Nick can call me out if I'm not telling the truth here, but I like to ask the team what I can do better for them. I think very early on, I like to get a team together and talk about the why. The Simon Sinek stuff. If you haven't read his books, or at least watch his Finding Your Why, there's some good TED Talks on that he did a number of years ago. But I've actually taken that class. We had all the SE leaders take it, where you spend a couple of days finding your why. And I like to do that with SEs so they find their why, what makes them tick, why they're doing what they do. I like to explain my why to SEs early on. And when you do that, one, it makes you a little bit vulnerable so they can see, hey, I'm just a person. But I like to explain to them that, and again, I stole this from my previous manager, like, I work for you. My job is to help remove obstacles, develop you, cultivate your skills so that you can go on to your next thing, whether that's a promotion in title, whether that's manager, whether that's into a sales job, whether that's into retirement because you made so much money blowing your number out, whatever it may be. I want to help you achieve those goals. So you tell me what I can do better. And so when you have a bidirectional coaching early on and you set that stage, I find that the team isn't afraid to give me, hard feedback. I've had a couple of them tell me, hey, when we're on one-on-ones, I can tell you're distracted. And I have this bad habit of, like, an email pops up and I would get distracted. Not intentionally, totally unintentionally, but it's something I really struggle with. So I got to either close the lid or kill email when I'm on the phone. I've had a couple of SEs give me that feedback. But I think because we opened the door early on to have bidirectional coaching, it sets it up so that you can give that kind of feedback in both directions. So I think that really helps to develop people, especially when they feel like they're helping and develop you. Because all my SEs, have definitely made me better.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Speaking of one-on-ones, Charlie, what do you think should ideally be discussed in a one-on-one between someone and their manager?
Yeah, I like to have the first half of it just be kind of what's going on in their lives. I like to let the SE just, how you doing? What's going on? I try to remember things that personally are going on with them and see how they're doing. Check in. Again, if it's about the people and you understand what kind of mindset they're in. A little tip I got from a career coach that was assigned to me as one of the leadership programs at VMware was, take 60 seconds before you get on that one-on-one and meditate, or whatever it is you like to do. Meditate, pray, however you get your mind clear, do some breathing, and just think about that person and what they might be walking into this meeting like. So if it's a field SE and I know that person's been traveling all week, had to drive 1,000 miles, maybe taking this from the car, maybe they're taking it as they're about to go through security in the airport, they're probably feeling rushed and tired and exhausted. So what would I want to hear if I were them? What would make my shoulders sort of relax and make me feel like my manager is invested in me and my career? So I try to put myself in their shoes a little bit and think about what frame of mind they might be entering this conversation with. Talk about some, I like to keep it non-work stuff, early on for the first, half of it or so, and then let's address whatever they want to address. Sometimes they're knocking out little things here and there within the meeting, so putting out fires, things like that. But I've also found that if you use the right tools from a reporting perspective, we have a couple of those here at VMware to understand the business and that kind of thing. If I know and I've looked at their dashboard and I see where they are with their opportunities and I have an idea of what's going on, they've given me that what's working, what's not working feedback, then we can discuss real things that need to happen in a phone conversation and not covering that surface level stuff, because that 30 minutes will fly by, right? And if you only have 30 minutes a week with your manager, you don't want to spend it saying, I went to this customer, they said they liked this product, they don't like that product, they're going to buy X. I can get all that from a report. Let's talk about what real challenges you're having, how I can help you. What do you need to be successful? Or whatever they want to talk about, right? It's their time.
It sounds to me like you're saying, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, maybe you can correct me, but you actually would appreciate it if the individual contributor is helping to set the agenda and maybe bringing things to the table, like problems they need solved, things that are getting in their way, speed bumps that they need removed.
Yeah, absolutely. So I offer that to them. I say, Sid, this is your time. Shoot me an agenda. I have an outline that I've provided them that's really simple, right? Like 3 bullet points. And I say, you own the agenda, send it over to me, and I'll have a couple of things that I may want to talk to them about that I throw up on my whiteboard or, in OneNote or whatever. But in general, I ask them to set the agenda, and some folks do it. They like to email it over. I have one guy who emails over all the meetings he had the previous week, and he'll put problem next to it if he wants to highlight that challenge. We have a help me work through this issue with that partner, or can you contact someone in the BU about this or that? So I kind of know what I'm walking into. And then some people like to freeform it, and it's totally up to them. I think something that's also important is worth mentioning now is that I have twice a year we'll have career conversations. Some people, and that's up to the SE, they're welcome to do it quarterly. I find that quarterly not usually enough changes to make real progress against goals, but if someone wants to talk about it quarterly, or if a position open they think might be a fit, a specialist job or something, and we need to have one more urgently, we certainly can. But those are separate career conversations, separate from the normal one-on-one. That way we're not trying to squeeze it into the last 7 minutes of a phone call, right? A career conversation is important. It doesn't need to be talking about putting out fires. We don't want to be talking about day-to-day tasks and such. We want to be talking about what's important to them and their career. So I think if the SE knows that those are coming on the calendar, it helps them then to narrow the focus of the one-on-one to what are the more immediate things they need to be working on.
Have you ever had someone come into a one-on-one and not really know what to ask you about?
Sure.
Because they didn't think about it before?
Yeah, I mean, we can always. There's always stuff to chat about, even if most of it's personal, right? I still think it's beneficial because this job's all about relationships, right? If the SE trusts me, then I can better help them, help guide them in their career, and better help solve problems. If they don't, then I can't, and so sometimes it might just be that they need to vent for a little while, right? So I can usually ask questions that will get them in the mindset to, dig into some stuff that would be relevant.
Sure. And in your case, at least, not too long ago, you had some people that you could go and talk to in person while others were remote. How do you find your one-on-ones changing based on the proximity of the employee?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think with I mentioned this earlier, there's a couple of things that are really important, which is to give them 100% of your focus. That's some feedback that I've gotten. And it's easier, I think now because I'm aware of that, to do that on the phone. Sometimes it's the only 30 minutes I talk to that person other than a team meeting. Not often. I usually talk to everyone multiple times throughout the week, but if it's a busy week and I'm traveling and they're traveling, it might be the only 30 minutes. So I know how it feels when I talk to my boss and it's the only 30 minutes I get with him. It's really important. Those minutes are precious. So again, close the laptop or kill email or notifications or whatever. Maybe even put my phone, down and walk away from it, which can lead to other problems like where did I put my phone if you've got wireless AirPods, which happens to me quite a bit. But for the folks in person, something that I learned was that because I could easily walk over to their cube or they could come to mine, it was easy not to protect that one-on-one time and not treat it as precious as I did the remote folks one-on-one time, because it's not as big of a deal, right? Because you talk to them 4 or 5 times a day. And I never got this feedback, but it was just something I became conscious of, that so if I got a text message, sometimes I would at least look at it and see if it was, something business important, or is it the wife or whatever. And that that's sending the message to them. I don't know if they take it this way or not, but I firmly believe it's sending the message that you're not as important as my phone right now as soon as I pick it up. Right? I need to treat that one-on-one time just as um, important as the one-on-one time with the remote employees. So I think it's a little easier to know that and acknowledge it for remote folks. Not as easy to do it in person, and you have to be really intentional. I mean, there's all these apps on our phones that are designed to get our attention, right? And they're really good at it. And so I have to be good about turning that over and not looking at it, not answering any phone calls when I'm in that one-on-one time. And I had some conversations with my on-site SEs about that, and they really appreciated that. That was important to them. Be on time for it, keep the time crisp. If I'm going to cancel it, almost never cancel one. I'll move it. I do weeklies with everybody. If they want it to be less often than that, we can talk about it, but I almost always do weekly. And if they need to move it, if they cancel it on me, I'll go put it back on their calendar for another time, right? If they want it to be canceled, that's fine. If they really don't want the time, but I find that the folks that tend to say, well, we don't really need to have the one-on-one, I don't have anything to talk about, I'm like, you know what, let's just go have it anyway, right? There's probably some stuff they don't want to talk about, and I need to dig in. That means there is something there. Or maybe a relationship just needs to be built.
Where do you think that culture of weekly one-on-ones comes from? I noticed it, right when I joined VMware, and it was, I don't want to say alien to me. Like my previous employer, my manager had something like 17 reports. So it turned into bi-weekly, and then it turned into monthly, and then he was across the country and it got canceled like 40% of the time. So I think we had like, 6 one-on-ones in my last year or something like that. But and that might be an outlier in the other direction. But this weekly one-on-ones, I mean, I love it. But what do you think the origin of that? Like, is that like a company like cultural thing? Is it a company management culture? What's the source, do you think?
That's a good question, because there isn't like an industry accepted answer for that I've noticed in any kind of manager training, where they say if you're a good manager, you're doing it this way. I think I go back to it is something I've only experienced at VMware, and I did have the same experience with as you did at other companies, where there was a leader who I really liked having time with him, but he would almost always cancel my one-on-ones, and he would do it about 5 minutes before, or he would no-show to it, and it was just like, oh, as an individual contributor, I'll never forget what that feeling was like. And so maybe that contributes to me wanting to hold on so tight to them. But, my manager always did it, and always made sure to reschedule if he couldn't. In fact, while we were sitting here, I noticed my manager had a conflict today and moved our one-on-one, but he didn't cancel it. Even today, that's still important to me. So, I think that it's definitely a VMware culture. I don't know that it happens on every single team, but on all the teams I've been on, I've always felt like they were good. And I've asked the team, do you want these weekly or do you want them bi-weekly? And there was a time when I was on the inside and had some really senior SEs who I saw constantly when I was in the office every single day, who said, I only need time with you every other week. That's fine. And that was when I had 13 or so direct reports, and I had some newer folks, and I was also hiring a bunch of positions. And they were like, look, I don't need it. I see you and talk to you enough. I just walk over to your cube and talk to you about things. But it was still good to have that dedicated time for us to sit there and talk, because, while we already had a deep relationship and I'd known them for 4 or 5 years, there's still just stuff that comes up in a quiet setting with no one else around that's not going to come up otherwise. Again, it's all about relationships. You hear this a lot, and it sounds kind of cliche that with your customers, you're building relationships, and with your employees, you're building relationships. But I think there's cliches, and then there's where the rubber meets the road. And for me, I like to see both parts of that. And for me, one-on-ones are always where the rubber meets the road, because you can say a lot to a person by, not canceling them, by being on time, by not being distracted, by being fully engaged, and by asking about their life. You do those things. None of that takes any talent. You don't have to be very smart to get all that right, but it means a lot to a person, and I think it really sets up for good relationships.
Yeah, most definitely. I would wholeheartedly agree with that. Um, I had to get past the feeling of being pulled in the principal's office during one-on-ones when I started at VMware. Not, I don't know why, but it seems like when you're in operations, working a help desk or something like that, they just don't necessarily happen on a strict cadence, or it's not anything strategic. It's more tactical. Where are we on these 5 projects? So it was very different
Hmm.
when I came on board VMware in a good way.
Yeah, and I think there's some really interesting stuff going on now. We could probably do a whole podcast on this too about a generation of people who struggle to have face-to-face conversations or even phone conversations. Because there's so many other ways for us to communicate. Text or IM or email. And I think email. A lot of these have been but especially in the corporate world, email is like the death of communication because people take things different ways than they are meant, and sometimes a 5-minute phone conversation is worth 45 emails, and it can be so much more effective. And that was something that I learned from working on the inside. When there was something sticky, and I'll always coach SEs on this. This is one of those where I'll give them the answer. I'll say, do you think that after they've gone back and forth a few times and sent me an email, do you think that you're going to solve this over email, or might there be a better way? And that's sort of giving them the answer, right? It's kind of a violent shove into go have a conversation. Um, but once I've done that, I find that they'll generally go have that conversation, even if they're awkward. Which I don't know if you guys ever met an awkward SE, but we're out there. So so I think that when you focus on these one-on-ones, what it does is it gets that awkwardness out of the way and it builds a relationship, pretty early on. It's the same reason that, I try to invite my whole team to my house for a dinner where I cook them food. I want them to see that I'm a human and I've got a family. And Nick, as you know, Berkeley's going to sit down, my 4-year-old, he might sit down in your chair with you and grab a piece of food off your plate, right? The whole idea is for
Yeah, that
everyone to
kid's an
see that
animal.
he is. He'll come at you with a plastic sword too, but the
But I
the whole
love him.
point
He's
is
great.
to, and he loves him some Nick. But the whole point is for my team to see me as just a person, right? And as a manager, I'm not quote above you. I'm not better than you, right? My job is just different, and it's to help guide you. So if we can see each other just as people and get to know each other, I think a lot of that gets facilitated by very earlier in the relationship and getting to know each other and working with each other, having those one-on-one conversations, both in person and on the phone, so that you just get to you understand where people are coming from, right? It's like the whole why thing, and sharing my why with my team and having them discover theirs and then share it back with me. Is that then when someone says something, if you don't know who they are, where they're coming from, it's really easy to get offended or get defensive and respond back. But if you understand who they are, you go, oh, I totally understand why Nick is saying that in that way, because in his previous job, he dealt with X, Y, and Z. And so, it just really helps you understand people in a better way, and where they're coming from.
It sounds like a lot of what you're talking about is building up this relationship so that the awkward conversations become less awkward. Like one of the things that you mentioned, I mean, almost as a throwaway, was having a career progression conversation. I think that's something that we recently talked about, and one of the things that we mentioned is like sometimes that's a super awkward conversation to have, right? It's like because it can come across as, hey boss, I don't want to work for you forever, so how do you help me do that? And that can be, if you put it that way, it can be really offensive. Right? So building that relationship, almost is like what you're saying is you want to be positioned as a person who wants that person to grow, who wants to, if they regard this as a nest, you want to see them fly it eventually, right?
Absolutely. I mean, good leaders want to see their people get promoted. If honestly, if a leader is struggling with that, they're probably struggling with some insecurities of their own. to be completely blunt. I think it's of course hard to see your best employees get promoted up and on. I turned over almost my entire team when about halfway through my leadership career at VMware, where they all went up and on to their next step in their career, be it manager or specialist or to a segment with bigger accounts or whatever. And it's bittersweet for sure. It's like, man, I'm gonna I'm gonna have to backfill this incredible talent. I gotta go find another incredibly talented person and coach them and train them up, and they're not gonna be as good, on day one. And that's sure that's hard to let happen. But my experience is that when you set people up to come onto your team to see that promise, when you have a new person coming in and they're seeing a more senior person move up and on, it makes that newer person work harder, right? You're going to end up with a team that's going to work harder, be more productive, be happier. And while, yes, you're going to deal with some turnover, the reality is you're going to deal with turnover either way, either negative attrition because people don't like working for you, or positive attrition because you've done such a good job developing them that they're going to move up and on. And of course, the individual contributors done that work themselves. It's not all the manager, obviously, but you just have to accept that those are the realities of this job. We're very fortunate here at VMware that we attract incredible talent. Right? There's a lot of people that want to work here, and so the candidate pool is always very rich. But I also and recruiting is a full-time job. When I have open positions, it's like having a second job. It's a ton of work, but it's also incredibly rewarding to see those folks come in, and you can see that they've got some skills that they don't even know that they have, and to watch them get cultivated into something they never even dreamed they could be, and then surpass their own expectations. I mean, that's my whole why, kind of drawn out into multiple sentences. That is my why, is to watch people surpass their own expectations, and watch them become confident. There's a great story of watching Nick, having never talked to a CIO before, and on the way to Dallas, you probably remember this, Nick, we had a phone conversation. The CIO was going to show up to this meeting, and he said, what kind of questions should I ask her? And I told him to go do some research on her on LinkedIn, and he went and found out all this really interesting stuff about her time at that company and the things that she had been through, and how she had survived some weird transitions. And we had probably, Nick, a 2-hour phone conversation when I was driving up to Dallas to meet you.
Yeah.
And I challenged him on what kind of questions, what would a CIO care about? What would she want to hear if you were in her shoes? What kind of questions would you like to have? And it went on and on for a couple hours. And I'll never forget that the next day in that meeting, he asked her a question, and her response was, wow, no one's ever asked me that, and we're like doing the happy dance under the table. Like, yes, that's what we're looking for, right? We're looking to ask profound questions to CIOs so that they know that we've done some research and we've tried to understand their business, and that we care, and that we want to understand how we can partner with them. So I think when you see someone sort of turn the corner like that, it's like, yes, that's that attribute that I knew that was in you, that diamond that needed to be, needed some pressure on it to turn into a diamond. We are seeing that being cultivated, right? And so when it comes to recruiting and hiring and developing people, that is far more rewarding than anything else in this job. So even selfishly for me, I guess, watching people get really good at their job and being promoted up and on to the next thing, that's actually becomes a pretty big reward for a manager. And if you're not ready to face that, then man, you're missing the good stuff. You're missing the real prize that's out there as a leader, because that's what it is watching people, move up and on and do that kind of thing.
Charlie, you've just been so generous with your time. Really appreciate it. And that last thing that you said about, again, maybe it's just a commentary on management culture here that I've seen. The idea that there's like a soft metric somewhere, and maybe it's not being measured, but this idea of how people have blossomed and grown underneath your management, right? How maybe one way to judge a manager is how well their people are progressing and getting promoted either to management positions or leadership positions or specialist positions. because they've grown so well underneath that manager. And I don't know if there is an official metric on that, but maybe, at a high level leadership position, somebody should be measuring that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, I think it definitely is a good indicator of someone that's a good leader. Aside from just going and asking all the people that work for him how you liked working for him, but I think that's definitely a sign of a good leader. Someone who really embraces that servant leadership, where they really do act out the words that "I work for you, Mister Individual Contributor." Like the Sanjay Poonans of the world do. I think to to sort of answer your last question better, if my manager is if I'm looking at wanting to move up and on, am I gonna rub my manager the wrong way by saying, hey, what's my next step in my career, that kind of thing. First of all, I don't think most managers are going to, um, of course, how it depends on how you word it, but I don't think most managers are gonna punish you for that per se. Hey, I want to eventually get off your team. Um, so let's say you're in a position where you think they would, where you go to have that career conversation and the manager's like, so I mean, I invested all this time in you, and now you're going to leave my team. Say, well, okay, what is your vision for me on this team? Put the onus back on them and ask them how they envision developing you and growing you, and what do they think that you would be good at. So, Mr. Manager, I've been on your team for X amount of time. I see the other options on this team are senior or architect or whatever they may be. Let's say you're in operations. Um, what does that my career look like in your eyes? What could I aspire to be? And let them answer that question. And let's just say that manager is, selfish with the talent and they don't want you to ever leave, and you're getting that feeling and it's pretty clear. However that happened, you think it's pretty clear. What I would say is, okay, what skill can you cultivate right now? You can learn how to work for a really tough boss. You know, what if you get good at working for a jerk? That is a skill set that I promise you're going to get to use again later. Not necessarily that you're going to work for a tough boss, but you're going to have a tough customer. You're going to have a tough person on another team who doesn't want to help you for whatever reason. Whether it's you're a manager and you now got to make two operations teams talk to each other to get your SE paid, right? You've got to learn how to get those people to do what you need them to do. Or you're going to have to get this specialist to talk to that person in PSO and this architect to come together to cultivate a solution for your customer, right? You got to get a bunch of people who don't report to you, who aren't incentivized to do what you want them to do, to come together. How do you do that, right? And so working for a difficult boss is a way that you can cultivate that relationship. You can learn how to deal with someone who's not easy to deal with, because I can promise you, if you're good at that, you're going to be good at every job you have after this, right? It's a challenge you're going to have later on down the line, be it personal or professional, right? Maybe you're trying to get the mailman to quit throwing your mail on the ground, right? Or maybe you're trying to get the trash guy to pick up the extra boxes you set outside. Go out there and have a conversation with him, right? Deal with the difficult person heads on and be super nice about it. And that's going to be a skill set that I think is going to take anybody really far. And that's not just technology, right? Or even leadership. That's just, life. So I think there's always something you can learn from every situation. I always ask, you know, that character is built under pressure and under turmoil. And, there's a smart person that said all spiritual progress that is built on the touchstone of pain, right? So if there's some pain going on, I'm getting cultivated here, right? So what am I learning from this scenario? You can always use it as a learning experience. So even if you do get all of the answers you don't want out of that career conversation, okay, this job is what it is. Maybe I need to be looking to move on. But back to my earlier comment, if I want to be a CEO of a small company one day, what skills can I learn in this job right now that are going to help me achieve that goal? Right? So I'm going to be building skills that are going to help me and help this company. Maybe I'm not going to get promoted to what I get promoted to, but it's going to set me up for my next job.
Yeah, that's great, Charlie. Hey, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but any parting thoughts that you might have on people looking into looking at that decision to maybe become a leader of people or a manager?
Yeah, I think it goes back to something we talked about earlier, which is, find those people whom you admire, who have a job that you think you might want, whether that's an individual contributor at a very high staff architect, CTO level, or a manager at any level, including your current manager, or a skip level one-on-one, which is a great thing to go have, of course, with permission from your existing manager. But go find those people who are doing something you think you want to do and ask them what they love about that job. Ask them what they don't like about that job, and ask them for honest feedback based on what they know about you. If they think that you would be a fit, and then go close those skill gaps. I think the important thing to focus on here is that if I look back on my career, every single job I had, from data protector backup administrator, which at the time seemed really miserable, all the way up into leading a team of field SEs in the enterprise space in the central US for VMware. Every job leading up to this one was necessary to build me into who I am today. I was learning something that whole time. And so if you think that your job is terrible right now, what can you be learning? What can you be getting really good at? Maybe it's sustaining repetitive, boring work, or maybe that it's so easy that it's given you some extra time to go cultivate another skill set that you might not have time to work on if your plate was completely full. Maybe it's learning how to deal with that difficult boss or some difficult coworkers, or maybe you can just make somebody's day better that you work with in a company where the culture isn't great. Like, none of us are happy here, but I can smile at that person, call them by name, and buy them lunch or whatever it may be, right? And those are all things that are going to, I think, help not only in the short term make you happier and see a little more purpose in your day, but build that skill set that's going to make you a better leader, whether you have a manager title or not, later on in your career.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Yes, thanks, Charlie. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Wow, Nick, again, just a great conversation. Really smart guy, like I said up top. I really liked what he had to say about team development, developing individuals. It's, again, something that in retrospect is obviously part of the job of the manager. Those of us who have had really good managers and really bad managers, probably, that's one of the contrasts that we would point to.
Certainly. And the whole idea of advise versus tell what to do, that has to be a difficult transition, especially when you're pretty sure you know what the answer to the problem is already. You have to help the person get there on their own.
Yeah, that's a really difficult transition to make for, all of us smart guys, right? It's like, oh, I know the answer to that. Let me tell you. Well, that's great. Are you going to tell me every single time that I'm in this situation? Or are you going to teach me how to be just as smart as you or find information the way that you do, et cetera, et cetera? So, a really interesting lesson. It's something I've heard, a couple different times now that I think about it. It's that, teach a man to fish, right?
Yes, sir. I liked the way Charlie handles his one-on-ones, and he would even put them back on someone's calendar if that person canceled, because he put such a level of importance on doing that with managing a remote team, as is his current reality. I just really appreciated the fact that he put such importance on it, and I would encourage other managers to certainly do the same.
Yeah. Again, I don't know if that's a cultural thing at the company that we work at, but it's definitely not something that I've seen emphasized to the same degree in other positions that I've had in the past. So anything else before we get out of here?
One final thought. I really enjoyed what he said about, if you're in a really bad situation, there are some things that you can do to learn from that situation. I'm not going to spoil it because that was one of the best nuggets in this episode, in my opinion. But how do you approach a really bad situation, and how can you turn that into a learning experience?
Yeah, I really enjoyed that part. I think that, ultimately, this is one of the episodes, 51 and 52 that I'm going to come back and listen to periodically. So It's been really good to re-listen to it since we initially talked to him.
Yeah, and I would say open call for other managers out there who want to share some nuggets about what it's like to be a manager, different perspective, what it's like to go there as a career path. Bring it on, let us know, and we'd love to help you say some smart manager things on the podcast.
Agreed. And if you have a particularly good manager who you think that we should interview about this topic, maybe you're, interested in hearing about their perspective on managing people, and help them break down, why it is that they're a good manager. Maybe you could give us a reference to that manager, and we'd be happy to reach out with your introduction.
Right. And maybe you don't have a great manager, but you need a great mentor. There's no reason you can't send that tweet out to @NerdJourney today to join the John White School of Mentoring and talk to John about what he thinks good management should be. Pricing and packaging to come. Just a reminder, we want people to subscribe and give us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. We want to know if we're being helpful and are always looking for interesting questions to ponder. We're collectively on Twitter @NerdJourney.
Farewell, listeners. Tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm John White @VJourneyman for Nick Cordy @NetworkNerd_, signing off.
Adios.